All right, John, I've been chomping at the bit to do this to get back into college football. So I've been trying to catch up during my little travels around the tennis world. So tell me, what do you think the Big Ten, which starts next weekend as we're talking, and the Pac, which is going to start the first weekend of November, what would we guess? And that's all we can do is guess. They're thinking when they see the headline in the New York Times today that refers to college football and says, hey, how's everything going? Check with me tomorrow.
Yeah. I think that's the approach everybody has had since the middle of March, basically, and it's certainly not going to stop till they get through the end of the season, whenever that is, right? I mean, it could end with a playoff in early January, but it also could end with a playoff in like early February. We don't know for sure. But I think the Pac-12 and the Big Ten are hopeful that their testing plans are going to greatly, greatly reduce the chance of cancellations and postponements. I mean, and they don't have there's no leeway, right? Neither of those conferences has any built-in buys like the SEC does the weekend of December 12th. But they're going to test a lot. And they think that that's going to give them a real chance. The X factor, though, is, what are the kids going to do when they're away from the football facility? And there is no way to predict that. And there's not really a way for them to control it, right? I mean, 21-year-olds, what are they going to do? So we'll see. We'll see. But I think that that's still the primary concern is behavior outside of football, right? There are going to be some false test results here and there, but the testing is not the problem. The problem is going to be behavior.
Yeah, John, it seems to me this is all for 7 months now. We're living through an exercise in can we change human behavior? And it doesn't matter whether it's academics, music, theater, going to the grocery store, or in this case, football. I'm curious because we're going to make sure we stay within a time frame here. You were on the front edge of the testing story and did a great job in unfolding the entire saga of how the Pac-12 did the deal with the company based out of San Diego. I've just been through 6 weeks of testing on 2 different continents, and I've had 3 different tests, from a saliva test to a mini Q-tip test to a brain scrape.
Okay.
I've had them all. And thankfully I've passed them all. But everything I read, which is all we're doing, we try to read and learn, is that they are varying levels of reliability.
Yes.
With as well varying costs and varying response times, right? They all vary.
Yep.
What's your take on the Pac-12 and the testing deal they have, and the faith that, as you've so rightly pointed out, for example, the president of Arizona, which has a leading medical center in our conference, is a doctor, yes. Dr. Bobby Robbins, who practiced at Stanford, for goodness sakes.
Yep.
So these are people that are very smart about medical issues that are making these decisions.
So the Pac-12 is leaning hard, and so is the Big Ten, leaning hard into the daily antigen tests, right? I mean, they're going to give, Pac-12 plan is every day that there's practice or competition, the players are going to get an antigen test before they go out there. And they're going to back it up with at least 1 PCR test a week. And depending on the school, I think it'll be 1 or 2 more than that. So, but it's the PCR test and the antigen test have different goals in some ways. The PCR test is more accurate and it's also more sensitive. So it can actually pick up virus once you're no longer infectious. So hence the false positives, right? I mean, the infection has passed through the body, but because you still have viral remains, you test positive, and that's been a problem for some teams. The antigen test is more of a public health measure because it is not as sensitive, not quite as accurate, but it is better at reducing spread because you can do it every day and you can get the results in 15 minutes. So the chances of a kid getting out on the field who is either pre-symptomatic or asymptomatic is greatly reduced because you're going to test him every day before he goes out there, an hour before he goes out there. And so if he tests negative, it's very unlikely that he will then over the next 3 hours generate enough viral load inside to become contagious. So you have gotten through that day's practice. And if anybody's interested in more information, a guy named Dr. Michael Mina from Harvard is the one who has really promoted the idea of the daily antigen test as a way, as a public health measure, whereas the PCR test is more of a personal care measure because it is more accurate, but it also takes 24 hours to get the results.
Yeah, that's a great call. And the last point about the testing thing, because we've discussed this a little bit offline. So, for example, at Notre Dame, and I do know a little bit more about this, they were the first school to bring everybody back. They brought their entire student body back and had in-person classes beginning the second week of August. Football team had been sequestered in an on-campus hotel prior to students coming back. Everything was fine. Students come back, and I've been given read a lot about this. Couple of off-campus big parties. On-campus kids go to the off-campus parties. Not just the off-campus kids. It's on-campus kids because they know.
Yep.
And now they come back into the classroom. And that's what's caused the spread that eventually Notre Dame had to stop classes for 2 weeks, had to lose a game, which I think they're going to try to make up at the end. And that's, to me, this every president, CEO, chancellor, trustee has to know this. They all know this. And they have to be, I just have to believe they're holding their breath when they see, all the way to Saban, for goodness sakes, who claims to have been practicing pretty cautiously and pretty safely. And even he comes down with this. They all have to be holding breath, don't you think?
I do. I mean, there's no doubt about that. Like you said earlier, right? It's a lot of this is about human behavior, and it's not just any human behavior. It's 18 to 22-year-old human behavior in a college setting. That's, it's going to be impossible for the Pac-12 and Big Ten to get out of this unscathed. But I think a lot of the issue for not only teams that are currently playing, but also the Big Ten and Pac-12 is, right, this is a super test of culture within your football program. Yeah. Accountability, leadership. Is that kid going to go to that party, and is he going to think to himself, if I get it, I'm going to let the rest of my teammates down, right? That's what you need. And so that kid says, you know what, I'm not going to go. That's a dumb decision. And I think the stronger your culture, the better your leadership, the more accountable every kid feels. It could be the walk-on fullback that is going to determine how well these teams get through it, because the testing plan is good enough to keep it, from being spread. The problem is if they go outside the football facility and make bad decisions, and you're more likely to do that if you don't have a culture of accountability.
Yep. Amen. And as you're saying that, I just watched this in Paris at the French Open, as we call it, tennis championship. One of the top players in the world is from Germany. He showed up to play his match in whatever round it was and looked sluggish, lost the match. And then afterwards, in press admits he had a temp of 100 before the match, felt sluggish, chose to play. Thankfully, he was immediately given a COVID test and it was negative. But the irresponsibility of his actions, just the player on the other side of the net, first of all, jeopardizing that player and that player's chances, not only at a major championship but going forward. The outrage within tennis was immense, and it was justified. And that's exactly what I thought about when you were just saying that, John, is that every program has to have that outrage within, that you can't hide anything. You can't just show up and say you feel fine if you don't.
Right. And that kind of culture is not just developed in the last 7 months of this pandemic, right? That, we both know that culture, a program that really has good culture, that takes a long time to build up, and it is just, it sustains over time. It's just not the snap of the fingers and okay, it's September 24th and the Pac-12 presidents vote to play, and all of a sudden it's like, all right, we got to be accountable. That's kind of thing has to be ingrained way ahead of time, or it's not going to last.
Okay, absolutely. Very last point on testing. Do you know, because I don't, so do you know what the difference is between the testing program that the Pac-12 schools are going to use and what the NFL has used? For example, I know the 49ers have been tested every day since July 7th, I believe. Every employee that comes in relevant to the football operation gets tested. And even with that, now the 49ers have been clean so far, but other NFL teams
Yeah.
with the same procedures have been hit. Is there any comp between what the Pac-12 testing program is going to be?
Well, I think there's two differences. The main difference is that NFL is using PCR,
Right.
right, which more accurate,
Yeah.
more sensitive.
Yeah.
And I think the NFL's had some problems with some false positives. In fact, I think that's what's happening with the Colts today, right? The Colts shut down their facility, but I think it was false positives.
Just heard that, yeah.
But the antigen takes a long time to get back, or the PCR takes a long time to get back. You can't take a PCR test an hour before practice and have the results before you get on the field, right? It's got to go through this machine that cycles a bunch of times to basically bring the virus out, and it's a 24-hour turnaround in a lot of cases. So there is, like, I haven't done the math myself, obviously I'm not nearly smart enough, but there are computer programs, computer modeling that has shown PCR daily testing is not quite as good at reducing infectiousness or spread as antigen, because of that there's a possibility that because you're waiting, if it's a Wednesday and an NFL player gets tested Wednesday, doesn't have the result until Thursday, but out on the field Wednesday could potentially be infectious.
Yep.
Whereas the antigen, you're getting it an hour before you go out there and it's positive or negative before you step on the field. So that's the big difference.
That's fascinating, because that's exactly the test I had in France was the 95% reliable test you're talking about, but it was 24 to 36 hours.
Yep.
Before I received on my phone, I got an email link to find out my result, but it was 24 to 36 hours. So that's a great point.
And I think that the other thing about the NFL is, right, they take Tuesdays off. And so I don't know what's going on Tuesday. So if they're testing the guys on, that the lack of a test on Tuesday creates this window, depending on when you got exposed and when you get tested and when you step on the field and when you get the results. There are these very small windows where you could have an infectious player on the field or in the facility. And in theory, that won't happen with the antigen testing. And there's a guy, if anybody's interested, Daniel Larimore is a computer scientist at University of Colorado, and he did a great video about the way the antigen testing is able to basically eliminate spread.
Yeah. You have become such an educated person about this stuff. Like, none of us, we used to say when we get into this business in our world, Jon, we didn't get into this to learn about knee injuries and legal terms and collective bargaining. And now you've been neck deep for 7 months in pandemic science.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's fascinating. It's tragic what's happened, but the science itself, I think, is really interesting. And I've watched a bunch of these videos, and I have read a couple of these papers that Michael Mina and Daniel Larimore combined on a paper that served as the basis for the Pac-12's medical advisory board for the recommendation to the presidents. I read the paper. I understood like 1 out of 5 words, but it's interesting stuff. And I feel like, the testing is the whole key. So if I'm going to be writing about the Pac-12, I got to understand the testing situation, because that's what it's all about. They weren't going to play without the tests.
All right, let me do the second half of this. Let's flip to some football stuff. Please challenge me on this. That's what I love about you. I have been so turned off by any conversation this year about the football playoff. I just think it is so out of place, so tone deaf with everything else going around, to be worried about something that only benefits 2-3 schools at most, given programs that are laying people off, and kids that are being asked to put themselves out there and play football. Some want to do it, obviously, but I'm just saying that whole conversation to me, I have just shelved. I could care less. So tell me if I'm screwed up.
You mean in general for college football, or specifically
Yes.
for the Pac-12?
Well, obviously I'm coming at it from the Pac-12 viewpoint. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, to me, the president signaled how they felt about it, right? That when they decided in August, on August 11th, that they were going to postpone the season, that was an indication right there that it was, not important to them. And you could make a case that it shouldn't have been important to them. And they have to, the safety of the kids had to come first. So I think for Pac-12 fans, it's clear what the bosses of the universities think. I think that the conference has got very slim chance to get in because of the difference in the number of games played, right? I mean, if the SEC and those other leagues have enough cancellations that everybody ends up with 7 or 8 games played, then maybe the Pac-12, could sneak in. But otherwise, I don't think it'll happen. The problem is that fans, I think, partly because fans need an outlet more than ever now. The success on the field in any sport helps provide an escape. So people are still interested. The recruits still care about who's going. And I think that the players, across college football, I think the players want to play, and most of them at least. And the competition is something that they're in it for. That's a reason that they're taking some risk right now, is the competition and the chance to win. So I think in an ideal world, you're totally right. But on the ground, on the front lines, it still matters a ton.
John, this conference, the Pac-12 footprint is so wide, and it covers a lot of different cultures, including California, where we are probably still the most restrictive state in the union. From your reporting and your sense, how has the Pac-12 avoided what happened in the Big Ten, where they had an open revolt by a handful of schools?
Well, I think the big thing, the Big Ten handled it poorly and the Pac-12 handled it properly, right? I mean, the Big Ten, clearly not every president was on the same page. There were 3 votes to play. Pac-12, they are very unified at that level on almost all topics. And I think that it certainly made it an easier decision for all 12 presidents, because at the time, the restrictions were so severe in California and Oregon that it was pretty obvious, they couldn't play. Whereas the Big Ten didn't have any state restrictions, right? They never had that issue. It was all a campus decision all along. It wasn't about county and state health ordinances, and there were no wildfires, obviously, there too, and that was an added layer of tragedy. All of it kind of conspired to make it a pretty obvious decision for the Pac-12 presidents. And then if you're a coach and that your president's against playing, you're probably not going to speak out. Ryan Day was pushing to play because his president voted to play, right? So, I mean, I always felt like that whole time, the entire Big Ten, was it 6 weeks? I don't remember exactly, from whenever they, postponed to whenever they played. It was all about getting Ohio State a chance to play for the national title. Yeah. That's the whole thing. And the reason they're playing October 24th is to get Ohio State a chance to play for the national title. Where the Pac-12 was not, that's an unfamiliar approach out here. And you could argue that it's a healthier approach, right? But also, I think they didn't have, the fact that there were no state restrictions in Big Ten country, I think made it easier for them to get back on the field, but it also made it easier for the Pac-12 to have a unified position against playing.
Obviously, I'm very pleased that was the case. I was waiting, and I had bated breath because I just feared Utah and Colorado, especially Utah, a state where football's huge, and their virus hit was not nearly as severe as the other states in the conference footprint. Nebraska was, to me, absurd. I mean, Nebraska's It's not 1972 and Johnny Rogers ain't here anymore. So just chill.
Yeah.
But I feared Utah and maybe Colorado might have been the schools that were going to step up and say, hey, wait a second, we need to play. This is nonsense.
Well, I think Colorado probably pushed to play harder than anybody else. But, in the end, the presidents kind of moved in lockstep. And it's tough when you've got four. I mean, the California schools are so important to the conference on so many levels. And all four of them were dealing with the same gigantic challenges. It was, what were the other eight really going to do, right? And now they could have figured out a way for some teams to play on Halloween. But again, the presidents wanted to be unified in the start date for everyone. So it turned out, for the Pac-12 that they did not have that uproar. And I think the other part of the reason I kind of forgot to mention is when the Big Ten canceled initially on August 11th, they didn't really say much, whereas the Pac-12 handled it very well with the messaging. They released that 12-page report from the doctors that basically said, here's why we're not playing, and here's what's got to happen in order to play. So if you've got your medical team being that transparent, it's hard for people to take issue with it, right? And they also had Larry Scott, and they had the CEO of the President's Council, Michael
University
Schultz,
president, right?
Yeah, and then they had their doctor, Doug Ackerman. All of them out there answering questions that day. And so they snuffed out any conspiracy theories, any room for doubt. And I think they handled it so much better than the Big Ten, which, was not transparent at all. And I think that led to a lot of the Big Ten's problems.
Yeah. As I'm listening to you say that, John, and I'm thinking why the four California schools are so important. And I still think fans generally may not be totally aware. The reason that the Pac-12 divisional setup is as it is that Colorado and Utah insisted as part of its inclusion that they be in the same division with USC and UCLA. I mean, that was there, as I understand it, they weren't coming unless that was the case. Stanford and Cal, of course, went crazy because now they're in the other division. So Stanford and Cal were assured they're going to play USC and UCLA every year, which is why the misses rotate between just a handful of schools. But it was all rooted in the fact that Colorado and Utah said, we ain't coming unless we're playing in LA every year.
Yeah. Well, and the Northwest schools also want that access to LA so that, one of them is always playing. They've got at least one LA school in their schedule. And then you consider the academic component, right? I mean, all those presidents want to be associated with the California schools academically. So that's obviously very important at that level of power in the conference. And so those schools, it's hard, if those four schools with all their Nobel Prizes are saying, you know what, we don't think it's safe. It's hard for the presidents of the other schools to then go back to their campus and tell their faculty, Stanford and Cal don't think it's safe, but we're going to go ahead and play. I mean, that's right, because the presidents have all these different stakeholders they got to answer to. And a lot of those stakeholders are faculty that care very deeply about the association with the California schools. And, presidents got a balancing act for sure. And so I think it holds a lot of weight when the four California schools are together on something. It impacts the whole conference.
All right, a couple of last football points. I give Jon Wilner tremendous credit because you are someone who offers possible solutions along with, I'm sure, what you think is the honest criticism and critique that's worthy. And that's a fair exchange in our world. Yesterday, you wrote a great piece. And I've thought about this a lot in the past, but I hadn't thought about it in conjunction to this year. Flip the big game site and it would help Stanford. There's no argument. Stanford's schedule imbalance, I think, is worse, but it would help both schools. And I thought it was your perfect reasoning by you because this is the year to do it. You're not impacting fans.
Not impacting fans. So for Cal, the big game obviously was at Stanford last year. It's supposed to be at Cal this year. Switching it is not going to – yes, Cal would have to play at Stanford 2 years in a row, but they're not giving up anything, right? Because they're not giving up a home field advantage with 60,000 people. They're not giving up all the money that comes with those ticket sales. And instead, they're going to go back to Stanford and play without fans, where it's, you know, it's much closer to a neutral site. So if they're ever going to make the switch where the game has to be played 2 years in a row at one site, and one of the teams is giving up a home game, Cal giving up a home game this year this is the time to do it, right? I mean, I don't know how else they're going to get it done. Like you said, they've been talking about it for a long time. If they don't do it this year, I don't know that they're going to get it done. And Stanford is going to, you know, they're going to remain in that terrible scheduling box that they're in.
Yeah. And just to add to what John said, and the reason, as soon as I read it yesterday, I went, my God, that's such a smart call. Knowing this, I mean, it's been going on in the late 2000s. There was actually a contract drawn up. It was ready to be signed, that they were going to switch the order of games, and Candlestick Park was going to be used as the alternate site, the quote unquote neutral site, to allow the order of games to switch. Cal was in the process of starting the renovation of the stadium. Candlestick Park offered you 60-something thousand seats to sell. So that part of it was good. And the contract was drawn up and ready to be signed, and Cal backed out. And then in the mid-teens, there was again another move afoot, and Levi Stadium this time was going to be the neutral site, with a lot of money enticing. Stanford had signed on, and I know Stanford had, you know, internally floated the idea, I guess, to their donors and major ticket holders, whatever, no problem. And once it got out of Cal, a couple of Blues got vocal on message boards and online, and Sandy Barber was the AD at the time, and Sandy backed out. She didn't feel like she could take the heat from some influential Blues. So it's been Cal that has, but this, I mean, I know this for a fact, that this has been ready to go on two separate occasions, and it's been Cal that has not been willing to, you know, it's walked away at the altar, so to speak.
Right. Well, I think Cal has also been opposed, and you know, reasonably so, to playing big game on the Saturday after Thanksgiving.
Yes.
And if they did that, that would also create a little bit more flexibility for each team in a normal year. Stanford with Notre Dame and Cal with scheduling someone else. But Cal they don't want to have all the big game, you know, festivities on a holiday weekend. So, you know, you can't blame them. But
to be fair, but to be fair about that, John, USC and UCLA are the same. They will not play Thanksgiving weekend. Same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So no, it's complicated. Cal, I think that they talked with Stanford about it. The year Cal played Oregon in a regular season game at Levi Stadium, which I think might have been 2014. I think it was Marcus Mariota's last year.
That's the period I was talking about, where Levi's was in the mix to be the new site. Yeah.
Yep. So I don't know if they don't. My guess is they won't do it this year, and I don't know how they're going to do it. But I think it would benefit Cal for sure, and it would benefit Stanford immensely. I mean, immensely.
9 a.m. kickoff. We're going to have one this year. Your idea. How did you come up with the idea?
I remember reading that Fox was going to start that big noon window, and that would have been in May of 2019. They announced that. And I was just thinking, well, maybe the Pac-12 could take advantage of it, you know, not every week for sure, but a couple of times a season might work to their advantage. It'd be a little different. It would be a different, bigger audience. And I remember we talked about it, right? I called you and bounced that off of you. Just to, you know,
I said, I wished I'd thought of the idea. That's how good when you said it to me, seriously. And that's a compliment when you say, God, I wish I'd thought of that.
Yeah. Well, thanks. No, it just, you know, the conference needs to take some chances, right? Take a few risks. And to me, you know, this isn't that big a risk, especially because there are at least 6, I don't know all of them offhand, but there are at least 6 programs that practice in the morning anyhow, right? They get the practice done, and the players are, you know, in class by 11, and they don't, you know, they go to the class in the afternoon. So for a lot of schools, it is not disruptive to the players' routine. And in fact, it would serve the visiting team a lot better, right? You don't playing at 9 a.m., playing at 7:30 at night screws up the visiting team's sleep schedule worse than playing at 9 a.m. does. So, and just the audience, the marketing opportunities, the ability to have the highlights of that game shown for 10 hours on ESPN and Fox studio shows.
That's it. That's the thing.
That's, take the chance.
When you brought that up, that was the thing that so stuck out to me was, yeah, I mean, we understand football people are the worst creatures of habit I've ever encountered in sport. So anything that
Yes.
changes habit and routine, they go crazy about. All right, put that aside. The concept of playing a game in the morning so that your results are talked about all day long across the country rather than being a late night, time fill where you've had a couple of cocktails and people are watching, but they don't even remember the next morning what the heck happened in the game. You were just giving them some late night entertainment. Was so zero return for the Pac-12 on that, other than the actual TV rights fees. We get that. But beyond that, zero return.
Zero return. And that's because people wake up, especially East Coast, you wake up and it's NFL. Yeah. Sunday, it is NFL. I don't know what time those studio shows start on the East Coast, but my guess is it's 9 or 10 in the morning on Sundays. So there's no shelf life. Those Pac-12 games that start at 7:30, they have no shelf life because people go to bed or turn off the TV when the games are over, and then you wake up in the morning and there's nothing. College football's gone. It's off the radar on Sunday morning. Whereas if you're playing at 9 or noon Eastern, let's say ASU USC is a close game. Let's say Keaton Slovis throws 4 touchdowns. That is 9 or 10 hours on ESPN and Fox of him throwing 4 touchdown passes. That's a huge deal for the conference.
To have Fowler and Herb Street and all the other top crews all day long on their games into the primetime SEC and ACC games talking about that accomplishment. Anyway, well, I really believe, because Herm Edwards is one of the guys you were talking about that practices in the morning, and he's going to be playing in this game. Chip Kelly is renowned, of course, for doing it. I think it's going to be a success. I really do. And as much as the coaches are going to have to adjust, I think it's not an every week occurrence. You can just say you do it once a year. Okay, we can all do a lot of things once a year. Yep. I think people are going to learn to like it. And for all of the complaining, as I've listened to it, John, firsthand for 8 years, traveling the Pac to do a lot of night football games, and it's 100% dislike from administrators, coaches, and fans. The kids never complain. I've never heard a player complain to me about night football. Kids are kids. They like it.
Right.
Saturday night.
Right.
But everybody else complains. So now you give them an alternative. I think once they take a taste of it, I think they're more will like it than not. It won't be unanimous, but I think more will.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I think there's a good chance of that. And plus, after the first weekend this year, you got a third of your teams are on Mountain Time. So, I mean, Utah played, was it Northern Illinois early last year? That was an 11 a.m. kickoff in Salt Lake City. So, I mean, what's playing at 10 in Salt Lake City if they played at 11?
20-something years of NCAA tournament games at West Coast sites. First day of March Madness, 11:15 to 11:20 a.m. kick or tip-off rather of the first game. And so, again, it's once a year. You're not making it a routine. But to me, I thought it was a great idea. In fact, I don't know if your employer will allow it, but for the game this coming up in a couple of weeks, you should do the honorary coin toss. You should be out there as the honorary captain. It's your idea. It's great.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
All right. I want to wrap this up with actually some football talk, because this is where we can dive in. You have been so good at following the Pac, and we've brushed on it in the conversation about the playoff, and the Pac-12 hasn't been as involved as it wants to be, quite frankly, as it should be. It should be better. I've heard you talk about this before, as recently as yesterday. You brought up a point that just, to me, gets right to the core of this thing. Line play. So, John, I looked this up just to refresh, because I've kept this stat before. So I'm going and I'm starting at the 2013 NFL draft, because 2012 draft was the last draft class of players that Pete Carroll brought into USC.
Okay.
09 was his last year.
Yeah.
So I'm figuring by 12, that's the last group of kids that he had any involvement with.
Yeah.
So 2013 on, we've now had 8 drafts, NFL drafts. USC has had 3 defensive linemen chosen. 3 drafted, period, in 8 years, one of whom, Stevie T, was a 7th rounder. One of whom was legit, Leonard Williams, big-time player.
Yeah.
3 defensive linemen in 8 drafts. 5 offensive linemen, none of whom, although one of them is a rookie this year, Austin Jackson was a first-round pick. So time, certainly for him, but none of whom have made a major impact. The other two prominent programs I looked, Oregon, 5 defensive linemen, and of course they've had 3 first rounders, Deion Jordan back, and then Buckner and Armstead back to back with San Francisco. 5 D linemen, 6 O linemen. So they've had more linemen picked than USC. And now Stanford. So again, back to 2013, we're brushing the very tail end of Harbaugh's influence.
Yep.
But it's still that style of play that you talked about. 5 offensive linemen drafted, none in the last 4 years. Stanford has not had an offensive lineman in the last 4 drafts. 5 defensive linemen in the last 4 drafts, only Solomon Thomas, and then the jury very much out on that, and Harrison Phillips, who got an ACL last year. So that to me tells you everything you need to know. And I didn't look up Washington, which has been a good program since Peterson got there. But boy, you talk about lack of what defines Stanford, right, in the Harbaugh era?
Yeah,
line play. And
absolutely.
What defined USC during all of our childhood? I mean, every year. Bill Walsh was the guy that came out to me once year when he was back at Stanford, and I was broadcasting there. We were playing during the Pete Carroll heyday. He said their offensive line are like 5 moving Coke machines.
Right.
Every one of them was going to be an NFL starter.
Yes.
And that is gone. We haven't seen.
I think that they had 3, you said 3 defensive linemen drafted in the last 8 years. I think they had 3 drafted in one draft, right? I mean, the 2005 draft probably would have had Cody, Patterson,
probably
Lawrence Jackson, maybe. Not Rucker was the next year, I think. But I mean, they had multiple defensive line draft picks every year for a while, and now they go years without any. And you just look at the difference in the size, right? I mean, the SEC, they got those guys that are 320 playing interior defensive line, and they can move. Pac-12's got, well, other than Washington, that's produced a couple, Pac-12 doesn't have any of those guys. Maybe Utah. But certainly the program, SC needs to have them, right? SC's got to have them, and they don't. And
Utah was the program I should have looked up because they have. Utah's done a nice job. And, of course, they have a very strong connection to the Polynesian community where big-bodied dudes are willing to play football. And Kyle Whittingham's done a great job with that. But so other than Kyle, that's where I wonder, to me, Mario Cristobal is so crucial for this conference because he brings that SEC line mentality. I was hopeful Mel Tucker until he just lost all respect for Mel Tucker until he ran away. I thought Mel Tucker could have done the same thing. But Cristobal, to me, is the guy that could change more than anybody right now in this conference could change that approach. Yeah, certainly Oregon's recruiting, their ability to recruit these days and his mentality, absolutely. If you're an elite offensive lineman, in the western part of the country, and you've got Oregon offering you, but you've also got LSU or a Clemson, you're going to absolutely think long and hard about going to Oregon because of the mentality he's got. Now, I'm not sure that mentality worked great last year with Justin Herbert, but certainly that they are more likely than anybody else, maybe except SC, to produce elite offensive lines on a year in, year out basis. And John, that's so fascinating you say that, because this is the conversation I have, for example, with Yogi Roth all the time about this. For example, the Mike Leach thing. I understand Mike Leach doing that at Texas Tech, and I get him doing it at Washington State. It's arena football, and it has a level of success, but to me, it has a ceiling. And that's never going to, obviously he's never going to get the level of talent at even where he is now. He's never going to get the level of talent to play in the college football playoff. It is not going to happen. But that style of play isn't going to do it either. And to me, and I want to hear your response to this. I had a chance about 10 days ago to have a conversation with Andrew Luck. And it was about something totally different, but it was interesting. He started talking football, and he brought up to me that he was having so much fun watching the Baltimore Ravens. Greg Roman, offensive coordinator, who of course was the OC when Andrew played at Stanford, and they started the 7 tight ends, 6 fullback, 5 guys wearing 96 in the backfield. I'm just going to blow you up on the line of scrimmage style of football that worked for Stanford.
Yep.
And Andrew was, and it was fascinating to me because it suppressed his numbers, right?
Yes.
Andrew doesn't win the
Yes.
Heisman Trophy because of that, to me, and it's not the fault of anybody. It was just he didn't put up the pinball numbers
Right.
that these other quarterbacks could put up. He said it's so much fun watching it. It's working in the NFL, and he believes it will work. He believes Lamar Jackson is for real, and he said it's really fun to watch Giro, as he calls Greg Roman,
Yeah.
get another swing at this and watch. And I'm sitting there going, that is phenomenal to hear because everybody believes the game has totally gone the other way, right?
Right.
That everybody has to play arena football now.
Yeah, no, you're right. Roman's one of the best coaches of the run game there is at any level of football. There's no doubt about that. And it will be interesting to see if the pendulum swings back, right? I mean, that's what's so fascinating about football, especially at the NFL level. You're seeing this trend now because the spread is so prevalent in high school that's what these players can do. So the NFL teams adjust their system to meet the personnel, and the personnel wants to throw the ball 50 times a game on RPOs. But that also makes you wonder if being different is going to be like the Ravens are different, and like Stanford was different for so many years, and kind of the way Utah is different a lot of times. Being different can be good, and we'll see if it's whether it's Oregon or someone else in the Pac-12, is that pendulum going to start to swing back the other way because teams want to be different.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I understand there's a body of work that's saying I'm an idiot for saying this, but I'm a believer that what we saw, for example, when Sonny Dykes was at Cal with Jared Goff, defense was just an afterthought. And that you to me, that's like group of five. You'll crush the group of five.
Yes.
You want to go win. You'll crush Memphis and UCF, and you can win all those games you want, but you're not getting to the CFP doing that. Now, Now somebody's going to come back to me and say, look at what Joe Burrow did last year. And like I said, there'll be people that will call me crazy, and I'm sitting there going, their defense was pretty good too. Right?
Yeah, I'll say.
They had a decent number of players on that defense.
Yes.
Their offense was off the charts, no question.
Right.
I
mean, absolutely. Look at all the guys they had drafted, right? I mean, Patrick Queen's a stud, right? Stingley's the best corner in college football. Right. No, I'm totally with you. LSU had a phenomenal defense, but part of the Dykes problem was that's just a terrible style for the recruiting pool that suits Cal the best, right? And Cal, when has Cal been really good under Tedford? Offensive line, right? Cal, there's no reason Cal should not have elite offensive linemen and a offensive system that is pro style. And what Dykes was doing there just was a terrible, terrible fit.
Yeah, no question. I did this way longer. I'm trying to stay to a new time frame, but you're just too darn good. You're too smart.
No, this is great.
What are you going to watch tomorrow?
I will watch Bama, Georgia for sure.
Okay. It's my first Saturday at home since they started playing games, so I'm curious. I don't know how I'm going to react since I've got nothing to do. It's
different. It is way different, but Bama, Georgia. We'll see if Saban's able to coach or not. I think that I read if he has 3 negative tests in a 24-hour or 48-hour period, that they will declare the original a false positive, and he can coach. So that's going to be the big drama leading up to that, and then we'll see how that what happens on the field. But it is way different when 7 o'clock Pacific rolls around, 7:30 Pacific rolls around, and that's it. There's nothing on.
Well, that's what scares me. I've heard some other voices like yourselves, national college football people, talk about how they're missing those late night Pac-12 games, that I'm sitting there going, oh, God, that's not what I wanted to hear.
Yeah.
But just think about this, John. I'll leave you with this. So Sarkisian, as we speak, is going to coach Alabama tomorrow night. Had things not worked out the way they did, 2.5 years ago, could this be Gardner Minshew coaching Alabama tomorrow night?
Oh, yeah. Huh. That's interesting. I had not.
How about that? He was going. He was going to be a grad assistant and get on the coaching staff.
Yeah. That would have been something, seeing him on the calling plays from with the aviators on, and maybe some cutoff khakis,
As much as it pains me to say it, he should be giving Leach 10% of his hit, because that's Leach did him right.
Yes, he
Leach did him
should.
right.
No doubt about that. No doubt. No, thanks for having me. This has been terrific.
All right, John, good being with you. We'll talk soon.
All right, Ted, take care.
All right, good. Okay, man, thank you. I
Yeah,
just
this was tons of fun.
was way too good. I just like talking, so
Yeah.
that's why I
Yeah.
do this thing. Gives me a chance to talk.
Yeah. Oh, it's
How
great.
old's your child now?
So I got a 13 and 8.
13 and
So
8.
yeah, so we got homeschooling going on. Not easy.
Yeah.
Not easy.
No, I'd
So
say. Hold on, just there.